He wasn't barking. He wasn't moving. Just a tiny German shepherd puppy sitting alone by the side of a highway, holding nothing but a ripped toy and a fading hope that someone would come back for him. Most people passed. One didn't. If this moment touched something in your heart, like this video, subscribe to the channel and stay with us to witness a story you won't forget. Autumn in Livingston, Montana was never subtle. The air was sharp and electric, painted with the scent of pine and the distant wood smoke curling up from scattered cabins. Golden aspens shimmered in clusters beside the cracked blacktop of Highway 89, where the cold came early and stayed long. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky smeared with bruised lavender and burnt orange. Traffic had slowed to a trickle, the sound of engines echoing faintly across the valley. Owen Blake, 15 years old, was pedaling his rusted mountain bike along the narrow shoulder of the highway, a hoodie pulled tightly over his head, and a flashlight duct taped to the handlebars. He was tall for his age, lean and angular, with shaggy brown hair that often fell into his slate-gray eyes. There was a constant furrow between his brows, one that hadn't gone away since the day his mother passed away 18 months ago. Since then, Owen had grown quiet, distant, and a little too grown up for his age. He no longer laughed easily, and the only time he spoke at length was to his dog. Except he didn't have a dog anymore. He was heading home from his part-time job at Hartley's Hardware when he saw it, a flash of movement in the ditch just ahead by the spot where the guardrail bent inward like a broken rib. He slowed, squinting into the shadows. There, huddled against a concrete drainage pipe and nearly camouflaged by fallen leaves, was a small shape still and shivering. Owen braked hard and dropped the bike. As he approached slowly, he realized it was a puppy, a German shepherd by the looks of it, perhaps 3 or 4 months old. The dog was thin ribs clearly visible beneath its matted fur, which was patchy in places and streaked with road dust. Around its neck hung a frayed length of rope, barely a leash. Tucked under one paw was a tattered scrap of fabric, a child's shirt maybe, or the remains of a blanket worn and chewed, clung to like a lifeline. The puppy looked up, but did not bark, nor did it move. Its eyes were the color of river stone, deep liquid, and impossibly tired. They held a kind of silent endurance that pierced Owen's chest like frostbite. It was the look of someone who had waited too long for someone who never came. Owen crouched slowly. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, buddy. What are you doing out here?" The dog gave no reply, only curled tighter but didn't try to run. That was the part that got to Owen most. It didn't even flinch. He sat down a few feet away on the cold gravel, pulling his knees to his chest. For several minutes, the only sounds were the rustle of wind through dying leaves and the occasional hiss of a passing car. Owen didn't move. He just sat there, waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The sky darkened further, stars beginning to peek through the veil of dusk. He glanced at his phone, no signal, and then back at the dog. Still no movement. It was only when the wind picked up and a gust stirred the fabric beside the pup's paw that it shifted. Just a little. Enough to scoot closer. And then, incredibly, it laid its head on its front paws facing Owen. A truck roared by, making both of them jump. Owen reached slowly into his backpack and pulled out the corner of a sandwich he hadn't finished at lunch, a bit of peanut butter and banana smashed between 2 slices of wheat bread. He tore off a small piece and rolled it toward the puppy. It sniffed, hesitated, then licked once. A moment later, it ate the rest. "That's better," Owen whispered. Somewhere down the highway, headlights gleamed like distant eyes. The wind howled louder now, sweeping dust across the blacktop. Owen knew he couldn't leave it there. It wouldn't last the night. He took off his hoodie, folded it like a cushion, and set it a little closer. The puppy eyed it warily, then gradually dragged itself forward and laid down upon it. That tiny gesture of trust broke something open in Owen. 15 minutes later, he gently gathered the dog in his arms. It was lighter than expected, like a bundle of twigs and fragile breath. He wrapped it in his hoodie and walked his bike the rest of the way home. Owen's house stood just past the edge of town, a simple 1-story frame with peeling blue paint and a dented mailbox shaped like a trout. His father, David Blake, was still at work. He drove long-haul routes for a freight company and only returned on weekends. Their house always felt emptier without him, though truthfully even when he was home, they barely spoke anymore. Owen carried the puppy into the garage, which doubled as his workshop and hideout. He laid the dog on a blanket in the corner, filled a bowl with water, and placed it nearby. The puppy drank in slow, cautious laps. "You need a name," Owen murmured, watching it. The dog looked up at the ears twitching. Owen glanced toward the hoodie it was curled in, thinking of the place he had found it. Cart, he said, like a shopping cart. Or maybe because you were left behind like something no one wanted anymore. The puppy blinked once. Then for the first time, it made a small sound, a low, almost inaudible whine as it shuffled closer and rested its head lightly against Owen's leg. Owen sat there for a long while, his hand resting on Cart's side, feeling its shallow breaths rise and fall. For the first time in many months, he felt something stir in his chest. Not grief, not anger. Something like purpose. The following morning, the sharp Montana cold had crept into every crack of Owen's garage, leaving a thin veil of frost across the small window. Inside, Cart lay curled on the old wool blanket, his breathing steady, but shallow ears twitching with each unfamiliar sound. Owen sat nearby on a stool, a book open in his lap, but unread, his gaze fixed on the puppy. The garage smelled faintly of engine oil and pine wood, a scent that had become comforting over time. Owen knew his father wouldn't be home until Friday evening. It was only Wednesday. That left him with 2 full days to care for Cart in secret. As he stepped outside, the wind bit at his cheeks, carrying with it the dry rustle of falling leaves and the distant hum of early morning traffic. Livingston was slowly waking. Trucks rumbled through Main Street, and a few neighbors were already scraping frost from windshields. After a quick breakfast, Owen returned to the garage with a small bowl of chicken broth he'd secretly warmed, using the microwave in the basement. Cart lifted his head but didn't stand. His eyes were alert but cautious, as if each movement needed careful calculation. "You're safe now," Owen said, setting the bowl nearby. "I promise." Cart sniffed the air, took a tentative lap, then more eagerly began to drink. Later that afternoon, Owen wheeled his bike out and stuffed a fleece blanket and some dog food into his backpack. He locked the garage door from the inside and left Cart with a bowl of water, and the radio playing softly on low-volume classical music, the only thing that seemed to soothe him. The ride to his part-time job took about 20 minutes. Hartley's Hardware was nestled between a rundown diner and a thrift store that only opened on weekends. Owen entered through the back, slipping on his apron quickly. The store's owner, Larry Hartley, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a deep voice and a limp from an old rodeo injury, nodded at him without looking up from the register. "You're late," Larry grunted. "Sorry, bike chain slipped," Owen lied. Larry, though gruff, had a soft spot for Owen. He knew the boy had been through a lot, but he didn't ask questions. Larry's own wife had passed 5 years earlier from cancer, and he'd since run the store alone. He was known in town as the man who said little but meant well, and he paid Owen under the table to help stock shelves and sweep floors. During his break, Owen took out his phone and scrolled through pet health forums, looking up signs of malnutrition and how to check for worms. It felt strange caring this much about something again. When he got home that evening, the sky already pitch dark by 5, Owen pushed open the garage door and found Cart in a different spot. He had moved closer to the door, as if waiting. The puppy stood, legs wobbly, tail barely wagging. His eyes lit up when he saw Owen. That small gesture made Owen's chest tighten. Cart slept inside the garage again that night, curled beside a space heater Owen had borrowed from the basement. Owen lay awake in his room above, wondering what his dad would say if he found out. David Blake was a man of hard lines and stricter rules. He was tall, broad, with silvering black hair and tired blue eyes. Since losing his wife, he had buried himself in work, rarely smiling, rarely speaking unless necessary. There had been a time when he used to laugh, used to take Owen camping, or make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, but grief had silenced those parts of him. Now they only spoke about groceries or bills. The next morning, as Owen left for school, he promised Cart he'd be back before sunset. It was Thursday, almost the weekend. At school, Owen drifted through the halls like a shadow. His classmates saw him as quiet and strange, the boy who stopped talking after his mother died. But that day there was a subtle change. He paid attention in biology, helped a girl who dropped her notebook, and even smiled once something Mrs. Ellis, the homeroom teacher, noticed. Mrs. Ellis was in her early 40s with kind green eyes and a voice like warm tea. She was petite, always wore thick cardigans, and had a knack for remembering things others forgot. She had once lost a brother in a car accident when she was young, and ever since she looked out for children who wore their grief like armor. After class, she approached Owen gently. "You seem brighter today," she said. Owen looked away, shrugging. Just a good morning. She didn't press, only smiled. Whatever it is, keep it. That afternoon, as Owen unlocked the garage, Cart bounded toward him, not a full run, but a definite trot. His eyes were brighter, and he gave a tiny bark, startling himself. Owen laughed. It was hoarse and short-lived, but genuine. "You're getting your voice back," Owen whispered, kneeling down. Later, while brushing Cart's fur with an old hairbrush, he'd found Owen discovered several scars under the dog's hind legs and on the flank. Some looked like bite marks, others like rope burns. He paused, fingers trembling slightly. Someone had hurt him. Not just abandoned him, hurt him. Cart didn't flinch. He looked at Owen, eyes steady as if to say, "I'm still here." That night, Owen didn't leave him in the garage. He waited until midnight, crept downstairs, and opened the back door. Cart followed him quietly into the living room. Owen laid a blanket beside the sofa and lay down above it. Cart circled once, then nestled against the side of the couch, one paw pressed gently against Owen's hand that dangled over the edge. They both slept. Friday morning arrived with the scent of frozen soil and distant chimney smoke drifting through the old town of Livingston. The first light slanted across the frosted ground, like a whisper barely warming the cracked earth or the shivering leaves that clung stubbornly to the branches. Owen woke on the living room couch, the blanket half kicked off his fingers, still tangled in the fur of the puppy, curled beside him. Cart stirred, let out a soft whimper, then sat up and yawned, wide tongue, curling ears perked to a sound beyond the house. Owen blinked slowly, adjusting to the morning light. Something had changed, not just inside him, but in the air. After breakfast, while his father was still hours away from returning home, Owen leashed Cart using an old belt and decided to take him for a short walk along the outskirts of their neighborhood. The boy walked slowly, careful not to strain Cart's recovering legs. The leash hung loose, and Cart kept pace easily, his gaze always scanning the quiet landscape. As they wandered past the last row of modest houses and into a dirt path lined with juniper and pine, Cart suddenly froze. His ears twitched. Then, like being drawn by an invisible thread, he veered toward a narrow trail Owen rarely noticed, overgrown and hidden behind a rusting cattle gate. Cart gave a single look back, then stepped forward, prompting Owen to follow. They emerged into a small clearing bordered by bare trees. At its center stood a weather-worn wooden cabin, with flower beds long overtaken by weeds. From within the cabin came the delicate trembling sound of a violin, soft, slow, and mournful. It drifted across the cold air like fog over still water, wrapping around Owen's chest and pulling at something unspoken. Cart stood still, eyes closed, head tilted slightly. He was listening. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman, slender and tall, wrapped in a thick knitted shawl that hung off her narrow shoulders. Her silver-gray hair was tied into a low braid, and her pale blue eyes, sharp and intelligent, blinked with curiosity behind thick-framed glasses. She leaned on a carved wooden cane that curved like a question mark. Her name was Mildred Atwood, though most in town simply called her Miss Millie. In her early 70s, she had once been a concert violinist in Chicago before a car accident stole mobility from her hands. Her left wrist bore a long scar now half faded, and her fingers moved stiffly when not holding the violin. After the accident, she had moved to Montana with her late husband, who passed 2 years ago from pancreatic cancer. Since then, Miss Millie had lived alone in the cabin, where they'd once planned to grow old together, playing music for no one but the wind. "Well," she said, voice dry but not unfriendly, "you're not a squirrel." Owen flushed. "Sorry, ma'am, my dog." He heard the music. Miss Millie raised an eyebrow. "Your dog has good taste." Cart stepped forward slowly, not in fear but reverence. He approached the porch and after a pause sat at the first step. Miss Millie looked down at him, something soft flickering in her eyes. "He's young," she noted. "Too quiet for a pup that age." Owen nodded. "He's been through a lot. I found him on the side of the highway." She tilted her head. "You rescued him." "Sort of," Owen said. "Feels more like he rescued me." Miss Millie looked at the dog again, her gaze lingering, then motioned with her cane. "Come in, then. Both of you, it's too cold to be noble outside." Inside the cabin, the warmth was immediate. An old iron stove crackled in the corner, and the air smelled of chamomile and cedar wood. Music sheets were scattered across a wooden desk, and several violins, each varying in size and age, rested on hooks along the wall like sleeping birds. Cart explored the room quietly, sniffing a rug, circling the stove, once then settling beside a large, overstuffed armchair. "I play every morning," Miss Millie said, sitting with effort into a rocking chair. "It keeps my fingers honest." She studied Owen's face for a moment. "You're David Blake's boy, aren't you?" Owen nodded slowly. "Your mother used to sing," she said almost to herself. "I remember her from town meetings. Gentle voice, strong heart." Owen blinked fast. "Yeah, she liked music." Miss Millie didn't offer condolences. She simply placed the violin on her lap and began tuning the strings with care. "You don't have to speak to heal," she said. "Sometimes you just listen." Then she played again. This time it wasn't a mournful tune. It was lighter, almost playful, a melody that danced like sunlit dust in a quiet room. Cart closed his eyes and lay flat, one paw twitching in rhythm. Owen sat, frozen, feeling emotions he hadn't had names for in over a year, stirring somewhere deep inside him. After the final note, faded silence lingered like incense. Miss Millie exhaled slowly. "He listens differently," she said, nodding at Cart. "Not like a normal dog. He understands the edges of pain." Owen glanced at Cart, who now stared at the violin as though it were alive. That dog, she said with conviction, was born to find the broken and sit with them until they're whole. For the next hour they drank warm apple tea, and Owen told her pieces of the truth about Cart, about the night on the roadside, about how quiet the house had become since his mom died. Miss Millie listened like a conductor watching a silent score unfold. When they left, she gave Owen a small bag with dog biscuits she baked herself and a folded music sheet titled Stillness. She pressed it into his hand gently. "Come again," she said. "He belongs to more than just you." As they stepped out, a breeze picked up, carrying the last notes of the violin far beyond the trees. Cart turned his head back once, then resumed walking beside Owen, tail swaying ever so slightly. The wind that Saturday morning in Livingston carried a strange weight with it, thick with the scent of melting frost and pine sap, almost restless. Owen noticed it as soon as he stepped outside, Cart trotting obediently by his side on the makeshift leash. They were headed toward the vet clinic on the south edge of town, a squat brick building tucked behind a row of abandoned storage units. Owen had woken early with a decision, firm in his mind. Cart needed a proper checkup. The old wounds on his body were too deep, too deliberate to be ignored. As they walked past the rusted water tower and empty baseball field, Cart seemed more alert than usual. His ears twitched constantly, his eyes scanning everything, and he paused often to sniff at patches of grass or the bases of trees, as if searching for something lost. The clinic was already open when they arrived. A wooden sign hung above the door, slightly askew, Pine Creek Animal Care. Owen hesitated on the steps, heart thumping, but Cart climbed them confidently as if he already knew this place wouldn't hurt him. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and lavender clashed strangely in the air. The waiting room was small, painted a pale green, with outdated dog posters lining the walls. At the counter sat a woman in her late 40s, plump, short, and with auburn curls that were clipped loosely at the back of her neck. Her name tag read Shelley Carver. She wore scrubs with cartoon cats and coffee stains, and her smile, though tired, was genuine. "Morning," she said, peering over her glasses. "Walk in." Owen nodded. "It's about him." He gestured to Cart. Shelley's eyes softened as they landed on the puppy. German Shepherd. About 4 months, looks underweight. She stood up slowly and leaned over the counter, speaking directly to Cart. "You've seen some rough days, haven't you, sweetheart?" Cart didn't back away. He tilted his head, then sat calmly beside Owen's feet. Shelley called out over her shoulder, "Dr. Brooke, you've got one more before lunch." From the hallway emerged a tall man, in his early 50s, lean and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a stoic expression. He wore his lab coat like a uniform and moved with the confidence of someone used to chaos. His name was Dr. Nathan Brooke, a former military veterinarian who had served 2 tours overseas before returning to Livingston to run a quiet practice. He had seen wounds caused by neglect, by cruelty, and even by war, but the ones that stayed with him were those inflicted without reason. He crouched beside Cart without speaking, letting the pup sniff his hand. Cart did cautiously, then stepped closer and allowed the man to examine his ears and jawline. Dr. Brooke nodded approvingly. "He's calm," the vet said. "Too calm for a stray." "He wasn't always." Owen replied, He's still learning to trust. Inside the exam room, Dr. Brooke worked methodically, checking Cart's heartbeat, eyes, and teeth. When he got to the ribs and legs, his fingers paused over the healed scars beneath the fur-thin, harsh lines around the hind legs and circular marks near the shoulders. "These weren't from another dog," he said quietly. "These are from being tied down. Rope burns may be wire. Someone restrained him, probably for long periods. These," he motioned to older scabs along the flank, "are more recent. Scrapes and bites. My guess he escaped." Owen stared at the table, jaw clenched. "So someone used him." Dr. Brooke sighed. "There are illegal breeders and worse things. Could have been a bait dog. He was small, vulnerable. But he made it out." Shelley returned with vaccination supplies, but stopped when she saw Owen's expression. "You okay, Han?" Owen nodded, though his voice came out hoarse. "Can we find out where he came from? If he had a chip?" Dr. Brooke nodded. "We'll scan." They found nothing. No microchip. No registration. Just a history written on a young body that had already survived more than most ever would. After the exam, Dr. Brooke sat beside Owen on the wooden bench outside. He watched the boy stroke Cart's fur, absent-mindedly silent. "You know," he said, "some animals come through this door and never look back. Others, they carry their past with them, but carrying doesn't mean breaking. It means remembering who made it through." Owen looked up. "He's not broken." Dr. Brooke gave a small smile. "No, but maybe someone else needs him to show them how to heal." On the way home, Owen took the long route through town. Cart walked with a bit more strength in his step, his tail flicking side to side. They passed the thrift store where an elderly man with sunspots on his cheeks and a veteran cap waved at them. Cart, without prompting, walked to the man and sat beside him. The man chuckled. "Well, aren't you a gentleman?" Owen, a little confused, offered a nod. "Name's Carl," the man said, reaching down to stroke Cart's ears. "Used to have a dog like this back in '62. He knew when I was hurting before I did. Looks like yours has the same spirit." Back home, Owen opened the garage door but hesitated. He looked at Cart, then at the house. He didn't want to hide anymore, so he led Cart through the front door. It was past 6 when David Blake returned his truck, rumbling into the driveway like thunder on wheels. Owen stood in the kitchen, frozen Cart at his side. The front door opened and David stepped in, carrying a duffel bag and smelling of diesel and road coffee. He stopped, blinked, looked from the dog to his son. Owen spoke before his father could. "His name's Cart. I found him. I've been taking care of him. He's not just a stray." David said nothing for a long moment. His face, worn and unreadable, finally softened just a little. He stepped forward, slowly crouched beside Cart. Cart didn't move away. David extended a hand. Cart sniffed. Then he placed a paw in David's open palm. The first storm of November rolled into Livingston with little warning. One moment, the sky was a silver canvas of thin clouds, and the next, it was weeping in sheets. Rain hammered against rooftops and puddled along the sidewalks, turning the air dense and heavy, with the scent of damp earth and wet bark. Owen stood by the front window, watching the curtain of water cascade over the driveway. Cart lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but ears alert to every clap of thunder. It had been a week since David Blake had met Cart, and in that time something subtle had shifted in their home. The house was still quiet, still carried the lingering shadow of grief, but it wasn't quite as hollow. David hadn't spoken much about the dog, but he hadn't objected either. He'd watched Cart from the corners of rooms, studying the way the dog followed Owen, the way his eyes scanned everything with quiet attentiveness. Occasionally, Owen caught his father smiling faintly when Cart wagged his tail in sleep. That afternoon, the power flickered twice before finally giving out. The hum of the refrigerator died, and the lights vanished. David emerged from the garage with a flashlight and a battery-powered radio. He was still wearing his work jacket, his face marked with road grime and fatigue. His voice was flat, almost disinterested. "Transformers down. Might be out all night." Owen didn't respond. He had grown used to his father's short sentences, the way emotion hid between pauses rather than in the words themselves. Rain clattered on the roof like an urgent tapping. Cart raised his head suddenly and let out a short, sharp bark. A moment later, someone knocked at the door. Owen opened it to find a figure hunched beneath a yellow rain poncho, water streaming from its folds. The figure straightened, revealing a girl around his age. Her cheeks flushed pink from the cold hair plastered to her forehead. She had big brown eyes and wore a soaked backpack over one shoulder. Her name was Ivy Saunders, and Owen recognized her from school, quiet artistic often seen sketching trees or birds near the back of the schoolyard. "I'm sorry," she said, teeth chattering. I didn't know where else to go." Cart was already standing between Owen and Ivy, not growling, but watching her intently. "My house is 2 miles up the ridge," Ivy explained. "I was walking home from the community center, and the storm got bad. Then a tree fell across the road, and my phone died." David appeared behind Owen, eyes narrowed. "You live on Copper Ridge." She nodded. He grunted. "Storm's not letting up any time soon. Come in." Ivy stepped inside, dripping water on the welcome mat. David fetched a towel, while Owen handed her one of his hoodies. She looked around the small house, her gaze lingering on Cart. "He's beautiful," she said softly. Cart walked over, sniffed her hand, then leaned into her leg. Ivy smiled, her posture relaxing. They sat together in the living room, the three of them and the dog, while the storm howled outside. Ivy pulled out a small sketchbook from her bag, its pages wrinkled with moisture. She began to redraw what had been ruined quiet lines of pine trees, the curve of a fox's tail, a crow perched on a wire. Owen watched, captivated by the way her hand moved with intention but softness, like someone trying not to disturb a dream. David eventually sat down too, taking the armchair across the room, sipping cold coffee from a metal thermos. The radio played softly, broadcasting weather alerts and static. Later that evening, Owen and Ivy sat on the floor beside Cart, who lay sprawled between them like a guardian. Ivy traced the scars on his flank, with her eyes not touching, but acknowledging. "He's like you?" she said to Owen, voice almost a whisper. "Quiet, but watching everything." Owen looked away, uncomfortable, but oddly seen. At some point, Ivy fell asleep on the couch, curled under a spare blanket, Cart curled at her feet. Owen sat by the window, listening to the rain slow into a soft patter. His father walked in silently, leaned against the frame. "She seems like a good kid," David said. "She is," Owen replied. There was a pause, then David added, "Your mom would have liked her." Owen turned. It was the first time David had mentioned her in weeks, maybe months. "Do you think she'd like Carded?" Owen asked. David's voice caught, then he nodded. She had a thing for dogs that needed saving. Thunder rumbled far off. The silence that followed was not heavy, but gentle. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the house had a heartbeat again. By morning, the storm had passed. Ivy left after breakfast, promising to visit soon. Cart watched her go, tail low, but content. As Owen stood beside the open door, his father stepped up behind him and laid a hand gently on his shoulder. It was a brief touch, but full of things neither of them had words for. Cart looked between them, then trotted back inside, satisfied that for now, this was home. The first snow of the season dusted Livingston like powdered sugar on a forgotten town. Roofs sparkled white beneath the late morning sun, and icicles clung to the edges of gutters, dripping slowly into the silence of early December. School was canceled due to the icy roads, giving Owen a rare pause in routine. He sat by the front window, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of cocoa, watching as Cart rested by the heater, head on, paws eyes fixed on the world beyond the glass. Something in the air felt different since the storm. His father had been gentler if still guarded, and Ivy had texted that morning to ask if she could visit again. But it was Miss Millie who had left the most unexpected impression. Her music lingered in Owen's mind long after it stopped notes dancing in quiet corners of memory. He decided to visit her that afternoon, Cart trotting beside him as they followed the winding path back to her cabin on the edge of town. Snow crunched beneath their boots and paws, and the trees stood like silent witnesses cloaked in white. Miss Millie's home looked even smaller in the snow, like it belonged in a storybook. Smoke curled from the chimney, and violin music once again floated into the cold air. Miss Millie opened the door before they knocked. She wore a deep green sweater, hand-knitted and loose around her frame, and her silver braid was tied with a thin ribbon. Her fingers, now wrapped in compression gloves, trembled slightly as she reached for the teapot on the wood stove. "I thought you might come," she said with a smile. "There's a strange clarity in the air after a storm. It tends to stir things loose." They sat together at her small kitchen table, Owen Cart at his feet, and Miss Millie pouring tea into chipped ceramic mugs. Her hands were slow but steady enough. I've been thinking about what you said, Owen began. That cart belongs to more than just me. Miss Millie sipped her tea before responding. Some creatures are born with the weight of others' healing in them. They don't choose it, it just becomes part of who they are. She stood and walked to a wooden cabinet filled with old photos, music sheets, and stacks of hand-bound journals. From a small drawer, she retrieved a flyer. It's from the community center, she explained. Every winter they host a gathering for children, ones who've lost someone or been through things no child should. They call it the Winter Quiet. No lectures, no therapy talk. Just music, art, and animals, the ones who listen best. Owen read the flyer, a winter event for grieving and at-risk youth. Music, storytelling, gentle animals trained to comfort. You think Cart would be good there? He asked. Miss Millie chuckled softly. I think Cart would find the ones who need him, before anyone could point them out. Later that week, Owen convinced his father to drive them to the center. David didn't ask many questions, just packed a lunch and said he'd pick them up before dark. The community center stood behind the library, a tall, barn-shaped building painted in faded blue. Inside it was warm and smelled of pine wood and cinnamon. Paper snowflakes dangled from the ceiling, and chairs were arranged in small clusters. Children and teenagers moved between tables, where volunteers guided them through watercolor, painting, beading, and quiet journaling. One of the volunteers, a man in his early 30s named Jared Hollis, greeted them. Jared had a soft build, kind brown eyes, and a slightly disheveled look, as though he never had quite enough sleep but didn't mind. He introduced himself and knelt beside Cart, who gave him a sniff, then allowed a brief head pat. Jared was the program coordinator, a former teacher who had turned to community work after the tragic loss of his sister to domestic violence. That grief had shaped him, not hardened him, but deepened his sensitivity to unspoken sorrow. He'd become something of an emotional compass among the kids. Animals are bridges, Jared said to Owen. Sometimes kids don't want to talk to people, but a dog. A dog doesn't ask questions. At first, Cart simply observed the room, sticking close to Owen. Then a girl with curly dark hair and a tired expression sat alone in the corner, clutching a drawing pad, but not drawing. She looked about 10, her posture tight and defensive. Cart approached her without prompting. He sat a foot away, then lay down slowly, head resting on his paws. The girl didn't respond at first, but after 5 minutes, she shifted the drawing pad onto the floor and tentatively reached out. Her fingers brushed Cart's back. He didn't move, just sighed softly. Jared noticed. That's Malia. She hasn't spoken since her dad died last spring. Owen sat nearby, heart thudding. This was it, what Miss Millie meant. Cart didn't perform. He didn't bark or nuzzle or beg. He just stayed. Quiet, calm, present. Later in the afternoon, Cart approached a boy in a hoodie with sleeves pulled over his fists. The boy was older, maybe 14, with freckles, a buzz cut, and haunted eyes. He didn't respond to the dog at first, but when Cart gently nosed a small stuffed rabbit from under the chair, the boy's jaw trembled. I lost the real one, the boy whispered as if to himself. Then, with stiff fingers, he stroked Cart's ear. By the end of the day, 3 children had sat with Cart. None had said much, but something had opened, a crack, however small, in the armor. Jared clapped Owen on the back. He's got the gift. Owen smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. Back at home that night, Owen told his dad about the center, about Cart's quiet work, about the girl who hadn't spoken in months, and the boy with the stuffed rabbit. David listened. He didn't interrupt. You're proud of him, David said eventually. I am, Owen admitted. David nodded slowly. I think your mom would be too. Cart curled at Owen's feet, gave a soft thump of his tail. Outside, snow began to fall again, not heavy this time, but gently, as if the sky was tucking the town in for the night. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with small, quiet miracles. Snow blanketed Livingston in soft layers, and the town glowed with holiday warmth. Twinkling lights in windows, wreaths on doors, and the smell of pine and cinnamon trailing from kitchens and cafes. But for Owen and Cart, the season was not defined by gifts or parties. Their rhythm had shifted, entirely centered now around the quiet work at the community center. Every Thursday afternoon, Cart walked through those doors as if he belonged there, finding the ones in need without command or leash. That Thursday began like any other. David dropped them off with a small nod and a rare take care. Cart walked at Owen's side, tail low, alert, but calm. Inside, familiar faces greeted them. Jared waved from a table where he was helping a child glue paper stars onto a cardboard sky. Ivy was there too now, volunteering after school. She wore a red beanie and paint-stained jeans, and her hands moved with confident ease as she helped a young boy mix shades of blue. "You came," she said with a grin. Owen nodded. "Cart wouldn't let me stay home." In one corner, Cart had already settled beside a teenager Owen hadn't seen before. He was tall, maybe 16, with shoulders hunched inward like a bird hiding broken wings. His hair was dark and cropped short, and he wore an oversized military jacket that hung off his frame. His name, Owen later learned, was Nico Reyes. Nico had just moved to Livingston. His mother, Elena Reyes, a petite woman with jet black hair and quiet grace, had recently transferred to the local hospital as a nurse after leaving an abusive relationship in Billings. Her past had carved a deep caution into her every movement. Nico rarely spoke, and when he did, it was clipped defensive. He had a sketchbook, but never let anyone see it. Cart had approached him, slowly placing his chin on Nico's boot and waiting. No barking, no wagging, just a quiet, grounding presence. By the end of the hour, Nico was petting Cart behind the ears absent-mindedly while drawing in his lap. It was the first time anyone had seen him relax. "I think he's got a new favorite," Ivy whispered to Owen. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the frost-tipped mountains, Jared called Owen aside. "There's something I want to ask you," Jared said, brushing snow off his sleeves. "There's a training program starting in January, therapy dog certification. Cart already does the work. This would just make it official." Owen blinked. "You think we could do it?" "I think you already are," Jared said. "But this would open more doors, hospitals, care homes, even schools." It was a big decision, and Owen knew it. Certification meant time commitment and money, but it also meant purpose, a path. That night, as Owen sat on the porch cart beside him, he looked up at the dark sky. Stars blinked above, clear and cold. The wind stirred the trees with a low hum, like someone breathing out a secret. Cart's ears twitched. "You hear it too, huh?" Owen whispered. Inside, David was fixing something in the kitchen. Since the center visits began, David had started doing small things again, organizing tools, checking the heater, even baking frozen pies in the oven. He hadn't said much about the change, but Owen saw it in his movements steadier, less withdrawn. The next day, Owen visited Miss Millie to ask her opinion on the training program. She was in the middle of tuning a violin when he arrived, her fingers slower than usual, wrapped in thicker gloves. "It's getting harder to play," she admitted with a quiet smile. "But the music still finds a way." Owen told her about Nico, the way Cart had chosen him without being told. Miss Millie listened, nodding gently. "Some dogs are drawn to silence. They don't just hear pain, they recognize its pattern. They lean into it, not away." She handed Owen an old leather folder, weathered with time. "It belonged to my husband," she said. "He used to train search and rescue dogs. There might be something in there that helps." Inside were faded notes, diagrams, and pages on canine behavior written in patient looping handwriting. That night, Owen showed the folder to his dad. David sat at the table longer than usual, flipping through it slowly. "You know," David said, not looking up, "your mom always believed in work that helped others. It didn't matter what it paid or who noticed. She called it soul work." Owen didn't say anything, just nodded. David looked at Cart. "If you want to do this, I'll help cover the fee." Owen blinked, surprised. "Really?" David nodded. "Yeah. I think it's time we both did something that matters again." In the weeks that followed, Owen signed up for the training. Cart began learning new commands, not just sit and stay, but how to remain calm around wheelchairs, crutches, sudden noises. He passed every test with a quiet confidence, never needing praise to stay focused. And Nico became a regular at the center, sometimes helping with younger kids, always finding a place near Cart. One evening just before Christmas, a snowstorm knocked out power across town again. The center hosted an emergency overnight for families who couldn't get home. Cart stayed the entire night, moving gently from group to group. He lay with a toddler having night terrors. He rested his head in a woman's lap, whose husband had passed a month ago. He even curled beside Jared, who sat up alone by the windows watching the snow fall like ashes. By dawn, as light crept across the horizon, someone wrote on the message board in the lobby, "He's not just a dog, he's the one who hears the wind calling for help and answers it." The final days of the year settled over Livingston, like a hush after a hymn. Snow blanketed the rooftops in gentle mounds, and the town square twinkled with warm yellow lights strung between lampposts. Despite the deep chill, there was a quiet warmth humming beneath the surface, one that Owen felt every time he looked at Cart. The certification had come through just after the new year. A simple envelope in the mail, stamped with a gold seal, announcing that Cart was now officially a licensed therapy dog. The paper itself meant little compared to what Cart had already done, but to Owen it marked the end of one journey and the beginning of another. Word of Cart's work had spread through the town like wind through winter branches. Miss Millie was the first to call. Her voice crackled over the phone, fragile but proud. "I always knew he was more than fur and instinct," she said. "He's a voice where there was once only silence." The community center began receiving requests from local nursing homes, small schools, and even the county hospital. Jared, now more energized than Owen had ever seen him, arranged a short schedule, starting slow, one visit at a time. Ivy offered to help transport them. Her old Ford pickup sputtered in protest most mornings, but always managed to get them where they needed to go. Their first official visit was to Willow Bend, a long-term care facility for the elderly, nestled on the edge of town. The building was small, with faded mint-colored siding and a roof dusted with snow. Cart walked through the double doors with quiet confidence, tail low, eyes scanning. He didn't need prompting. At the front desk sat Ruth Meyer, a petite woman in her late 60s with cropped white hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had been a nurse her entire life, and now managed the facility with the stern compassion of someone who had seen both beauty and heartbreak in equal measure. She adjusted her reading glasses and gave Cart a look of amused approval. "Therapy dog, huh?" she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Well, let's see what kind of magic you carry." They started in the common room. Most of the residents were gathered around a fake fireplace, sipping lukewarm tea. Some watched television with distracted expressions. Others simply stared into the flames' mines far away. Cart moved slowly, pausing beside each person. It was the piano, however, that changed everything. An old upright stood in the corner, covered in a lace cloth. No one had touched it in months. But when Owen sat down and played a few awkward notes, something he hadn't done since his mother passed, a few heads lifted. One of them was Mr. Lionel Grant, a retired train conductor with a silver beard and a weathered face like creased paper. He had mild dementia and rarely spoke. But when Cart settled at his feet and Owen played a soft tune, a simple melody his mother used to hum, Mr., Grant blinked, sat straighter, and began tapping a slow rhythm on the arm of his chair. Ruth watched from the doorway, eyes glinting. "I haven't seen him move like that since last Easter." After that day, Cart's visits became a weekly event. The residents began looking forward to Cart Thursdays with quiet anticipation. One woman, Mrs. Donnelly, who had been bedbound and refused to eat, reached for her spoon again when Cart rested his head gently on the edge of her mattress. Another resident, Walter Hennings. Once a Marine saluted the dog each time he entered, his old discipline somehow awakened. Outside these visits, Owen found himself being invited into places he never imagined: schools, church groups, even the local VA center. David came to one of the sessions, sitting quietly in the back as Cart worked the room. When Owen turned to glance at him, he found his father smiling, not just the half-hearted kind he used to give, but something full, something released. One afternoon, after returning from a hospital visit, they received a letter in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a photograph of a German shepherd puppy, young, thin eyes wide and glassy. The picture had clearly been taken months ago, perhaps longer. Tucked behind it was a note: "If this is the dog I think it is, I don't deserve to know how he is, but thank you for giving him what I never could." No signature, just those few lines. Owen stared at the letter for a long time. Then he folded it and placed it gently into the folder Miss Millie had given him. He didn't need to respond. Cart had already done the answering. Miss Millie's health began to decline in late January. Her hands, once only stiff, became frail. The tremors worsened. The last time Owen and Cart visited, she handed over her favorite violin, a weathered instrument with a small chip on the scroll. "I want you to keep it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "And one day when you find someone else who's lost their song, let them hold it. Music should never be buried." She passed away a week later, quietly in her sleep. Owen didn't cry at the funeral. He stood with Cart beside him, the violin case held tight in his arms, listening to the wind move through the evergreens that surrounded the small cemetery. Ivy placed a white flower on the casket, David stood behind them, both his hand on Owen's shoulder. That night back at home, Owen opened the violin case. He didn't play, just let it rest across his knees while Cart lay nearby, tail curled to his side. The house was silent, but not hollow. Weeks turned into months. Cart's work expanded beyond Livingston. They visited towns up the valley, places with names Owen had only seen on road signs. Each visit brought new faces, new stories, and always someone who needed the kind of healing only Cart seemed able to offer. And yet, despite the miles, the moments that meant the most were the quiet ones. Sitting beside Ivy under a tree near the community center, listening to his dad hum while fixing an old lamp. Watching Cart fall asleep with his head on someone's lap, eyes closed, finally at peace. Cart had once waited on the side of a highway, believing someone would come, and someone had. Now he was the one who came for others. He was the echo of hope that had once called out through cold winds and empty roads and found his way into the lives of those who had long forgotten how to listen. Sometimes the ones who have been abandoned end up becoming the ones who save us. Cart was left on the roadside with nothing, but he gave everything back to the world. In everyday life, maybe all someone needs is a quiet presence, a gentle gesture, or the courage to stop and care. If this story moved, you please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below. Have you ever met an animal or person who changed your life in an unexpected way? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories that heal and inspire.